Good morning, and welcome to this month's edition of the Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation's third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat. My name is Bettina Campbell, and I'm a social service coordinator, and I'm also a Medicaid CHIP assister for the Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation, which is the parent company for Healthy Kids Mississippi. I will be your moderator today. We also have with us this morning Lottie Miner, who serves as the project director for Oak Hill Community Development Corporation, and Mr. Thomas Robinson, our technology and metrics director. He's assisting us with technology today. We recognize our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our executive president, Dr. Michael O'Miner. In addition to this Zoomcast, we are restreaming today's webinar on our Oak Hill Regional CDC and Healthy Kids Mississippi Facebook pages. Feel free to share on your social media pages. Well, got that out of the way. So today, our guest is Dr. Donald Green from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And he will provide us with information today on mental health and substance abuse use and co-occurring disorders, and how we as lay people can better understand the connection between mental health and substance use disorders. Now, Dr. Vereen is no stranger to us. He's been with us several times, and he had the pleasure of having him provide us with information on a variety of mental health issues and medical concerns. However, for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, I will share just a little bit of his background. Dr. Vereen is a medical doctor. He also has a master's of public health, and he is currently the director of the University of Michigan Substance Abuse Research Center. He is a public health psychiatrist who directs community-based research activities and public health research activities in such areas as drug abuse addiction, mental health, violence, and HIV at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. And guess what? He was born right here in Biloxi, Mississippi. But he's traveled the world over as an Air Force brat, so he's got to see a lot of things. And he earned his medical degree from Tufts University School of Medicine and his master's of public health from Harvard School of Public Health. From 1998 to 2002, he served as the deputy drug czar under Presidents Clinton and Bush, where he oversaw community-based prevention efforts, the National Youth and Anti-Violence Medical Media Campaign, and he introduced new drug treatment approaches in the United States. And he also helped to establish the World Anti-Doping Agency. He returned to NIH to oversee efforts to bring the power of research to bear on such areas as child abuse and neglect, health disparities, and then he developed new clinical research strategies. And he joined the School of Public Health to foster community academic engagement and advise state and local officials on drug policies. So now that's what you have done, Dr. Vereen. And since you were here last, will you kind of catch us up on what's been going on with you?
Sure thing. It is a real pleasure to be back, to share and to learn from each other. But I did want to share that my better half, who had recently become the provost at the School of Public Health, is going to become the new president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. This is kind of an interesting move for an academic economist who has advised presidents here in the United States and around the world to bring that knowledge to bear on a region of the United States to oversee and look at and try to help out the economy of New England, which is where the Bank of Boston is focused. There are 11 other banks, but she's the first Black woman to be the head of a bank, and she'll be joining the head of the Atlanta Fed Bank, who's an African-American male, and they'll be making good trouble for us. Starting July 1st. So our whole family's proud of that. And, you know, Bettina is a friend of the family, and so it's nice to be able to share that.
Well, I'm certainly excited about it. I mean, anytime a Black woman can reach these kinds of levels in these United States, uh, it's time for it's a shouting time. It's a proud time, and especially women, we want to lift up our Black women because we're so often not given the credit that we do. So I just wanted you to share that information because it's awesome, not only for your family and for the country, but also for us as African Americans. So.
Amen.
So Dr. Vereen, I'm going to let you start your presentation. And it's just really great to have you back with us today. And I'm sure you have some wonderful knowledge for us. And go ahead.
Well, good morning. I was asked this time around to actually, I'm going to be reviewing some of the things that we've talked about before, about mental illness in general, depression more specifically. This time, I was asked to say something about co-occurring disorders and how mental health, mental illness, and substance abuse what is it when they're interacting with each other? What is that all about? The sense among the professionals that take care of folks who are suffering with mental illness and substance abuse, they're aware, but the rest of us may not be aware that there are some underlying commonalities between mental illness and substance abuse. And we're going to talk about some of those, and I'm going to emphasize really three things. The first is that there are these underlying things that are going on, and it's the biological underpinnings that I want to draw attention to. The only reason I want to draw attention to them is because we tend not to talk about them. You know, if you behave badly, people talk about the behavior and then ascribe that to you as a person. In fact, there are things going on underneath biologically that we need to be aware of for lots of different reasons, and I'll make that clear. And actually, let's just jump in and start there, because I do want to only take about 10 or 12 minutes to present some information about these areas. And then I want to have more of a give and take, either answering questions or hearing thoughts about what's been presented, because that's how we learn. So with co-occurring disorders, the important thing to think about first, actually, could we just switch to the next slide? Yep, there we go. And I tried to do that slide, so let's switch to the next one. So the first thing that's important to understand is that substance abuse is a disorder. You know, if you look in the DSM or any of the criteria that list all of the symptoms of all of the different mental illnesses, substance abuse is right there. It's always separated out because many people assume, oh, you chose to use a drug. That's your fault. That's not the same as having a mental illness. Even though people blame people's bad behavior because of mental illness on them as people. It turns out that so much of what drives substance abuse is mental illness. Depression drives a lot of mental illness. If you're manic, you will take drugs to blunt the effect of that raging manic brain that you have that's causing you to behave in very erratic ways. So the important thing is that when you have a mental illness, and substance abuse and addiction are mental illnesses, we are experiencing something that is out of balance or out of whack. What we feel and experience in general results from our biology, the way our brain functions, our psychology, how we see the world. The way we see the world can be totally hijacked by early trauma. If you only see the world in paranoid ways, that's a natural response to growing up in a high pressure, traumatic environment. And so what happens to us inside, it's not just how we think and how we feel, it's also what's happening in terms of our biology. If you're under trauma and under stress, your blood pressure is up. If you're under trauma and you're under stress, your stomach is making a lot more acid than it would otherwise. And when you're under the pressure of trauma and you're dealing with it all the time, that brain that is reliving trauma is working overtime. All of the neurotransmitters and neurons, they're working overtime to either remember or to try to not remember that trauma. And so that's what if I could leave you with one point today, it's that anytime we think about mental illness and anytime we think about mental health, the loss of the lack of illness, we should be thinking about our brains and what shape our brains are in. Next slide. So brain and balance. So this diagram, which I used the last time I presented and shared with this group, there are a whole bunch of things. There are biological things, social things, psychological things. I've just tried to explain those very quickly. But what I want to do with this picture, if you can notice it, is that all of these things contribute to mental health as well as mental illness. But the health comes when there is a balance, when there's a positive psychological outlook on things, a positive social environment in which we're trying to live our lives, and a balance in what's going on inside of us biologically. All of those are important for mental health. If any one of these is off kilter, that can affect mental health. Now, I'll just pick out one. If you have a really high IQ, think about some of the smartest people in the world. They're often unhappy because they don't fit in. Things are out of balance because socially they may have trouble relating because they see things faster and before anybody else sees them. That's an example of how any one of these, if they're not in a good balance, then there won't be mental health. There'll be some amount of mental illness. And that's the point. Our brains are important, and then balance between all of these different factors. Next slide. So if I could take a second or two to talk about the biology. Is there biology involved when you behave? Yeah, I'm talking to you right now. I'm thinking about the words that I want to use. I'm remembering the slides that I either made or chose. I needed my brain to do all of that. I need my brain to figure out how to talk to you, how to explain the slide. And inside my brain, there are systems that relate to vision, systems that relate to how I'm actually feeling right now, systems about perception, and who my audience is. And then these systems in my brain are all made up by these circuits. And if those circuits aren't operating, quickly and without any barriers, then you're not going to you're not going to see somebody who's behaving coherently. These circuits are then made up of individual cells, and then those cells are made up of genes. And I point all this out because you can't behave without a brain system, without a neural system. You can't behave if any of these other smaller parts aren't working properly. And oh, by the way, let me just make a very clear point that also has to do with biology. If you don't eat well, if you're not eating well, the way your genes express themselves, the health of these cells, the health of your circuits, the health of systems, whether it's your brain system, it's your cardiovascular system, it's your renal system, your gastrointestinal system, they're not going to function very well if you don't eat well. Eating is all about biology. And I want you to be aware of that concept, not afraid of it, and constantly think about it when we're thinking about behavior and other things related to mental health and mental illness. And if we could jump to the next slide. And so this is a picture of where some of those circuits are and why they're important. I have a cup of my favorite mint tea right here, and that's a reward for me. I have a system in my brain that says, oh, I love that flavor. I'm satisfied by the extra fluid that I'm getting because my mouth's a little dry because I'm a little nervous. I have these systems in my head about memory and learning. I'm hoping that you'll remember some of the things that I've mentioned today about brain and balance so that you can be able to use them in the future. Motivation and drive are very important things. The motivation to get up on Sunday morning, dress my best so that I will look good to other folks, and go and then learn, maybe relearn, but certainly learn something new that I didn't know before from the Bible, the way it's being presented to me by whoever the minister is. And then there's a part of the brain, and there are many other circuits, but I'm just pointing these out. Sometimes we want to jump up and do things like kids do. And in the front of our brains, we have a set of circuits that put the brakes on things. I like to give the example that if I'm presenting, everybody is just waiting to clap and say, Dr. Vereen, you are just the most brilliant person. But they don't want to disrupt the presentation. And so there's a set of circuits in the brain that says, calm down. There'll be time for this. Let's put this off for the future, and we'll find a socially acceptable way to give those kinds of accolades. And so these circuits are critical. They're critical for our behavior. And it turns out when you are a substance abuser, all of these systems get changed by the constant drug use. When you get into recovery, when you get into treatment, those systems rebalance and they start functioning more normally. And then you approach mental health. And so when you see these kinds of presentations, don't be afraid to think about the biology, But keep in mind that illness is almost always the result of some imbalance, and that the important part of treatment and recovery is restoring that balance. And here are just some examples of parts of the brain whose balance needs to be restored when it comes to having an illness and then having it treated. Next slide. I'm going to skip this one and let's move on to the next one. And then there are disparities with mental health, and they probably have to do with the environments that we're living in and the unequal way that folks of color are treated. And if we could skip to the next slide, and then the next one as well, and then on to the next one. Okay, I want to end with this one to drive home the point about biology and the importance of the brain and the importance of balance. You have two CAT scans here. There's an enhancement, and I won't go through all the details, but you have a brain that is normally functioning on the right. You see that there are these orange, hot, yellow areas where the brain is actually functioning. The person on the left, the brain scan on the left, is of a person who's asked to do the same activity as the person on the right, but they're depressed, and the outer part and some of the inner parts of the brain just can't get going. And we can see this. We can diagnose depression like this. It's expensive. It's not necessary, because usually we can tell from how the person describes how they're feeling and how they're looking. We can tell by either asking them questions and observing them. We can see that they're depressed. And when they get better, we'll see that through their behavior. But we actually have the technology to see the biology that underlies mental illness like depression. And that's partly why I want you to get used to that idea, because it opens up new avenues on not only on how to think about mental illness and mental health, but also what to do about it. This slide points out why sometimes medication is a very good intervention, because it can more quickly provide balance. A combination of medications can sometimes do that a little faster. And then once you're in the balance again, maybe you don't need the medication. Maybe the environment that you were in has changed. That's really the point and the reason that I'm presenting this and making this point, because you'll be able to think about mental illness and mental health. Co-occurring disorders, they're all mental illnesses, and how balance is critical, either the lack of it in terms of generating mental illness, or the engagement of balance in recovery and in treatment. So with that, I'm gonna stop and take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Dr. Vereen. The review was nice. I mean, I stop and I think about how many times I've heard people, and myself before I, became a master's level social worker, and had to study and understand these things. People say they can stop drinking. Look at how they're acting. Why don't they just do something? Why do they behave this way? So this kind of helps us to begin to understand that people who drink alcohol or people who are getting high off of drugs or whatever to try to make themselves feel better is not because they don't want to have control, is that they don't.
Yeah,
And it's not just being honorary or contrary. There's something biological going on with them that they can't bring these things together in their mind.
yeah, it's hard to admit, but we're not always our own masters because there are other things going on, and recognizing that there are other things going on means that it may open up other options or other ways to deal with your problem. So, for example, when you talk about the use of drugs, think about food. Now, I will admit to you, when I was doing my internship, some of the suffering I saw, I was tired because I was up all night, the stress, and even the racism that I experienced, as a Black doctor in Boston. These folks from South Boston and Charlestown would just, they wouldn't let you treat them, and they were in terrible, terrible pain and on the brink of dying. And I would make it home and I would eat a pint of ice cream. And I would tell you to this day, I could not help myself. And if it was a really bad day, I would have 2 pints of ice cream and crawl. It did make me feel a little bit better, but I it's not the healthiest thing to do. But at the time, it felt really good. And I did that a lot of times. And it's an illustration of the loss of balance. When you're in a stressful situation, you're not 100% yourself. And the recovery can take a while. The recovery takes some effort. And that's the point of all this. Your approach to mental health, mental illness, and wellness has to take off.
Now, Dr. Vereen, some people would say that all this emphasis you're putting on biology kind of lets people off the hook. That aren't people responsible for their own behavior?
Yes and no. So let's take an extreme example. Someone is mentally ill. We don't know that they're mentally ill, but they behave badly. They survive the police coming to get them. Because we know what happens. The police see someone who's not acting in a way that makes them comfortable. They get very aggressive. They shoot, they choke, because that behavior is off-putting to them. It frightens them. But let's say you're behaving badly, you make it into jail or whatever, you make it into court, you're found guilty. Well, then, before they sentence you, they want to know, well, what's this person's brain like? They never ask that question, but that's really what they're asking. Well, did this person have a terrible childhood? Did this person have a mental illness? Well, if there is something biological, if there is something that happened to this person that they were not in control of, the law says, well, we can't hold you 100% responsible. And I would argue that we're not always conscious of what's going on biologically inside our bodies and inside our brains. I raise all this just so that you're aware, so that you can truthfully say that, you know what, I was only 50% in charge of what I was doing. Therefore, I need to go and get some help, because there's a 50% part that I can't control. And that you have some control over. But if you don't if you don't see or understand that aspect of behavior, you won't seek out help and you won't be open to it as well. So I think it's a falsehood to say that we are completely in control of what we do. I'm a political independent, but I'm going to pick on something that the Republicans love to talk about. And that is, personal responsibility. Well, it's like everything, it is not absolute. Okay? They let men off for crimes of passion because they know that when you get really upset and angry about something, you might lose it. Therefore, if you know that, then you need to make sure that when you go into situations, you will avoid getting angry. Or if you're going to get angry, you do it in a place where you're not going to hurt anybody. That's what that is all about. Knowing more and understanding the truth about our behavior and the basis for it opens up our understanding of it and empowers us a little bit more to be able to take a little bit more responsibility than otherwise. Our ignorance can take away our ability to have more responsibility. It's not a cut and dried thing, but that's an excellent question. And more knowledge allows for more control.
Okay, thank you so much. That clears up some for people, I hope, and myself. I see Sister Brenda Wilson have a hand up. Please open your mic and ask the question.
Yes, ma'am. First, let me comment and say, Dr. Vereen, you have made things so perfectly clear. You made it more clear than any other person who in the mental health industry has ever made it clear. And you've combined all the basic elements of what goes into a person's mental health or mental state. My question is prevention.
Mm-hmm.
What should a person do? What should a family member do? A parent do if they notice early on their children doing things that is considered out of character? Because our children are so impacted by their environment, of course. And I mean, what can we do? What can we do?
I think children are especially sensitive to their environment. And so parents, if they have an inkling of what may be happening in these children's environment, including what may be happening in the family or what may be happening in the home, be honest about some of those things. It's very important to reach out for help, because if you're seeing something that you don't like or that you're concerned about and you don't want it to progress further, that's the prevention that you're talking about. There are resources. We can go to our ministers and say, hey, I'm at my wit's end. I've noticed something. I'm not sure what to do. And your minister is a very, very important person, because like many parents, they care about you and they will be able to identify resources. Ministers are the first to say, well, if you're not feeling well, whether it's mentally or physically, they're going to suggest you go to a doc, go to a professional. Our school systems should have some kind of system in place if you're concerned about the behavior or the well-being of your child. And then it's important to have some kind of evaluation. And for children, it's not a given, but more often than not, the child's environment, their psychological state and their biological state, this biopsychosocial approach is almost always what happens in pediatrics. We forget that when we're adults, but you want someone, You want a set of professionals to be able to give you some feedback and information about what they're observing. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, taking my child to some professional and getting some label, oh, your child has this, with a little bit of this. Oh, your child is diagnosed with this. The last thing we want is some kind of label, some kind of tag, that, further, stigmatizes, our babies. Ideally, you do want a diagnosis. You do want an assessment. And the reason is, and this is why healthcare is so important, why we all need to be plugged into healthcare. It's because if you get a diagnosis, if you get an assessment, that tells you what needs to be done to help that child. An accurate diagnosis of a mental illness, an accurate diagnosis of a digestive disorder, an accurate diagnosis of some other kind of malady that the kid may be suffering, and you see it in their behavior, is important, because you can't right the balance if you don't know where to start. So labels, we like to avoid them, but labels also are the entry to what needs to be done to help that child. Now, we don't have the best healthcare system out there, but ideally, that's what you want. Our ministers, leaders in the faith community, they're wise, they see things, they have experience, they know where to direct people, they know where resources are. Ministers also know their limits. So ministers will be the first to tell you, you need to see a different professional for this. You go and you check so-and-so out, or you go to this clinic, and then you come back and you let me know what's happening. That's usually what happens. You don't know where to go. There are people who care about you that will do that, and there are people who will care about you in the healthcare system. I know it's thinner in some places than others, but go and you get the information that's going to help explain not only the behavior and how it is your child is suffering, but that information becomes the first step to figuring out how to rebalance what's going on. And if you see it early, you do your investigation early, you go and you get help early, and that usually means that what you have to do to reverse what's going on, to rebalance what's going on, won't be as extensive than if you wait until things just explode and the problem becomes overwhelming. So I would recommend first reaching out and getting help. That could be family, it can be our faith community, it can be a friend. You'd be surprised. Oh yeah, my kid did that and she had this, and my kid had this, but she had something else. And this is where I went, and so helped me figure that out. Be proactive. Don't be afraid of the diagnoses, because that's going to be the entree, the entrance to what needs to be done. So that would be my advice. Now, if there's an aspect to your question I didn't get to, please let me know.
No, you answered it very, very well. My next question is going to be, how can I get your contact information? I just come for a conference.
We will have Dr. Vereen's information posted on our webpage, and you can always call me, Brenda, and I'll be able to share that information.
You can always send me an email, is the easiest. And then we can either set up a time to talk or text. So I'd be happy to do that.
And
Thank you.
unlike a lot of people who say that they're going to get back to you, Dr. Vereen gets back to you.
Well, I
And
appreciate that.
he sticks with you until you get the answer that you need, or until he thinks he's gotten you to the right place where you can get the answers that you need. So, Eloise Smith, I see your hand. You have a question or a comment? Open your mic,
Yes.
please, and ask your
Yes,
question.
Ms. Campbell. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. And I just want to add on to what Ms. Brenda said in reference to having, pertinent resources available. And Dr. Vereen, you did an excellent presentation as the community health director in my area. Of course, because of the COVID pandemic,
Mhm.
we started seeing a lot of mental illness, increased, tripled really. And then we gradually start seeing it in the children also, depression, having anxiety about the pandemic and about, dying. So they were dealing with a lot of tough issues also. And we were kind of like baffled, we have ready the resources for adults, and we were scrambling, trying to get information for, how to deal with the youth population. And slowly but surely, we addressed that issue. So thank you for explaining everything so much in detail, and having great resources that we can utilize is so important. And we're stakeholders in this, parents, teachers, faith-based organization. We're all stakeholders in this. And so we have to address it accordingly. And I have relatives who deal with substance abuse, and now, I can look at them differently and not be so judgmental, because I know now what's exactly going on with them. They're out of control. And it's kind of like, I have one family member, he's dealing with substance abuse and mental illness. So he uses the substance abuse to treat the mental illness, to try to, he's like medicating himself with the drugs. So it's very complex, very complex.
Absolutely. And I just add the following thought. The stigma associated with mental illness, as opposed to mental health, is, one of the silver linings from this pandemic, maybe over time, will be that, none of us were spared some level of mental illness, some level of loss of balance, in our mental world. I put on a good 10 pounds. Partly it was exercise, but, it was partly the anxiety. When I had to go to the store, I knew I was going to be exposed. And somehow that turned into, I ate an extra rib or something, and I had another pint of ice cream. It isn't easy to see how these things affect us, but we have to be open to the idea, and that there was an imbalance with this pandemic. Our environment was severely put off balance. So that meant all of us in the world were going to be off balance in some way. And those of us that, were doing okay were able to figure out how to rebalance things internally, ways that you could control your environment. Then that's really important. And thank goodness, that there were resources that could be rallied to help people. But you still have to figure out how to use them in this new with this new challenge. And it seems like you figured that out. And more power to you in that sense. The battle's not over yet, but more power to you in that sense.
I want to go back and just touch on something that you said, Dr. Kareem, because I think it's important. We talked about the faith community, and we talked about the fact that you can go to your spiritual leader, your pastor, your minister, and seek help. A lot of people feel that if they do that they're not being true to God. They feel like they're saying that they don't trust God to heal them. And I heard you say, no, that's not the case. It's that sometimes our biology is so far off that we need something other than the minister. We need something other than prayer, or excuse me, let me say, in along with prayer.
Yep.
To make the situation better, and that we should not feel guilty or ashamed or embarrassed by the fact that we have some biological disorder going on with us that is causing us to act out in mentally inappropriate.
Yep. So we have lessons from Jesus about this. He cured lepers. Now, I don't know what happened. We think of it as a miracle, but the man did something. He did something beyond what was known at the time. And he called on whatever powers to be able to heal those folks. And that lesson exists in a parallel today. There are things that happen to us that we need help with. And you must go somewhere, and you got to have faith in the resource that you go to. So the process is the same, and the lesson is the same. And our faith leaders care about us. They love us. So they're going to do the best to rally whatever resources that they know about, or they'll reach out to others who have maybe more knowledge than they might about these things. The important thing is helping you to rebalance and really question it. Well, is it a failure? Bring that to your minister and say, am I failing here? By coming in, and then have a discussion about that. I mean, I don't know. The ministers I've had in my life they've almost always been the smartest people that I know. And if there's a limit, they'll figure out a way to deal with the limit that's been reached. And you pray on that. You pray on that and you figure out a way to move forward. Very, very important lesson.
Thank you. Then there's another thing you're talking about, medication.
Yep.
A lot of people don't like taking medication. They don't like the way it makes them feel, or just, I don't like swallowing all of these pills. Just the idea of putting all this stuff in my body. So how can we help them with that?
Okay, that's an excellent question. As I was saying, sometimes we're overwhelmed and we need help with something. Our biology is off kilter, off balance, out of whack, and we need help balancing it. If it helps if you understand the biological basis for some of these problems that we as human beings have, because it will help you to understand better or more easily why these medicines, why these chemicals, when we put them in our body and they're delivered to the right place, they're actually rebalancing things. So I'll try to further answer the question by giving a personal example. I have hypertension. I've had a hypertensive issue since I was about 15. They thought I had a tumor on my adrenal glands, got that worked up. That wasn't the case. But my doctor in medical school, my blood pressure started to go up again, and said, you know, we're gonna try to keep you off medicine. You need to focus on your diet. You're getting exercise, but you need to make sure you keep getting the exercise. And you need to either do yoga or relaxation. So those were my medicines. And I continue them to this day. But about 10 years ago, I was going to my doc and my pressure started to creep up and it didn't come down. I was doing all those things, although I wasn't exercising as much. And I knew that. I admitted that to myself. And I knew I wasn't going to turn that around. And he said, here are the choices, because if that pressure keeps up at this level, you'll have a stroke. I can't tell you when. You'll have a heart attack. Can't tell you when, but you'll be at risk for these other things. So I still have young children. I have a wife, a mom, brothers, nephews. And I waited and I said, okay, I'll take this biological intervention as much as I don't want to, but it'll rebalance things so that I can regroup and then figure out what to do to be able to come off the medicine. So the dose of my medicine has actually come down. I was hoping I'd be off of it by now, but COVID came along. I'm blaming COVID for that 10 extra pounds, which is adding to the blood pressure. But the medicine is keeping me balanced. I'm taking into account there were a few side effects initially, but they went away after 2 days. And my body got used to it. And I'm at this balance right now. I'm at a pretty good place. And I still don't want to take the medicine, but I value this balance. And talk to other people who take the medicines, because they'll have views too. I have some people say, medicine doesn't matter to me. I'll take whatever the doctor orders. And then there are some people who want to know each individual medicine, what it does, what it doesn't do, and then they'll make a decision. I'm not taking that one. I might take this one, but I'm not taking that one. You have to figure it all out. But the important part is you've got to come to a balance, because that's what's going to maximize the highest quality of your life. And the biology does matter. Faith alone, so-called faith, sometimes that faith has to be put into some other things. You have to put faith in other people. Sometimes you have to put faith in a biological intervention like a medicine. And so these are not mutually exclusive issues. And again, you have to decide for yourself, but don't make those decisions alone. Make them with people who care about you.
People that you trust to give you the right information.
And the right support.
And the right, yes.
Because there are some people who take medicines, I think, too easily, because they think the medicine is going to cure them. And that's inappropriate faith, because that's not true. Medicines don't cure things. They just help with the balance. Very little in medicine is cured, by the way. You can take some antibiotics for a handful of infections and be cured of the infection. But almost everything else we do, and occasionally surgeons can go in and cut out something and you're cured of it. But almost everything else is managed. It's all about balance. It's all about supporting your own body so that it can work to rebalance itself. By the way, antibiotics don't work if you don't have an immune system.
Mm.
If if you don't have white blood cells and you don't have an immune system, antibiotics are not going to help you. So all of these medicines work with your body to rebalance. And that's an important thing to know, because they don't teach you that when they're prescribing the medication.
Yeah. So, are there any other questions? Do we have any questions on Facebook or any other others?
I'm checking now.
Okay.
We have to.
No questions on our social media.
Wonderful. What? Okay. Does anybody else have any questions that we'd like to ask Dr. Vereen? No?
If anyone has any question, they can just raise their hand and they can and I can allow them to speak.
You can raise your hand, or you can open your mic and we'll allow you to speak. Okay. We don't have any, at this time, it seems that we don't have any other questions, but if you do have questions, you can still, just drop it in the chat here, or you can call me and I'll be able to make the right connections for you. Once again, we want to encourage you to just share this information with your social media, with your families, with your friends, because it's some very important information. And still, we talk as if COVID is over. It's not over. And we don't know when it's going to be over. So it's still affecting people. And then, of course, there's everyday life that's still affecting people. And so we want to make sure that our families, that our friends, that our co-workers, our church members, our community have the resources that they need in order to be able to address issues such as mental health and co-occurring disorders. So again, we thank you, Dr. Vereen, for being with us. You always bring us such a wealth of information. And I'm going to throw this out there because Dr. Vereen and I were having a conversation last night. And he's very concerned about people having the right kind of information about mental health on an ongoing basis. And he kind of asked if I would just ask you if there are topics that you want to talk about that we can bring him back on another type of Zoom or webinar or whatever on a more regular basis, so that he can until you've got all of your questions answered. So think about that. If that's something that you are interested in, please get in contact with us and let us know, and we will begin to see what we can do to make that happen. And so I wanted to remind everybody that on Monday, April the 25th at 6 p.m. to join us for the Ask Mary and Pat Zoom webinar. And in May, our third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat, we'll be talking about strokes, the signs, the symptoms, the causes, the type of treatments and prevention, and also about a stroke model called FAST. And our presenters will be Dr. Leslie Sklaras and Reverend Dr. Sarah Bailey. So you will be getting a professional information, but you'll also be talking to someone who has implemented one of these type of programs for her churches and her community. And so I hope that you will join us. If you have other questions or you just want to learn more about us, you can go to our website, www.okhillregionalcdc.com and www.healthykidsms.org. Once again, we acknowledge our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, our executive director, Dr. Michael O'Miner. This has been a production of the Oak Hill Community Development Corporation, belonging, building, and bridging in the Mid-South